5:40 in the afternoon on a warm, sunny Saturday afternoon in Goa. With me is Alan Machado Prabhu, the author of an upcoming book on the Goa Inquisition. You might think that we are promising this book being upcoming, but it's almost out. It should be out in a matter of days, not weeks. And we did 3 parts already in this series. Uh, we started with a very broad picture talking about the Inquisition, archives, and statistics. I must say that this view of the Inquisition is very different from what we've heard so far, and the stereotypes and the cliches and the widely accepted facts. So Alan is going up about challenging all of these with facts and figures. Very interesting, I must say. So his first part was on the opening up of the Inquisition archives and the statistics that emerge, what we are learning from the statistics, the kind of conclusions we can draw from it. That was part number 1. It's online on YouTube. The second part was the creation of the black legend about the Inquisition, in particular the black legend of Spain, also spilling over to Portugal and the Goa Inquisition in very big ways. That was a debate in itself. The third part I thought, which was most interesting in our times, was the role of Saint Francis Xavier, the role or the lack of a role of Saint Francis Xavier in actually getting the Inquisition to Goa, whether he's blamed fairly or not. All these 3 parts are available, so we request you to check out my personal YouTube channel. You'll find it there. And today we are looking at the Goa Inquisition and the auto da fe list. Okay, so what exactly were the auto da fe's? Why did they come about? When were they held? It is a bit of a technical subject. It is a technical term to start with, Alan, right? So I won't come in between you and the subject, but one request: keep it simple. Start with a big picture. We can go down to details, specifics later, because there is so much detail that it's easy to get confused and caught up with the details. Tell where do we start, and how is it significant to our big story, to our big picture, please.
Good evening, everyone. Today I'll just talk about the auto da fe lists that are available to us today. There is a lot of misconception on the term auto da fe, and it has even gone to the extreme. Some people have gone to the extreme of saying it is trial by fire. It's nothing like that. It's not. The term itself is very simple and clear. Auto is an act. Auto means act. The fe of the faith. So it's auto da fe essentially means an act of faith. Why is it called an act of faith? Because essentially an auto da fe was a public show of in which convicts were reconciled to the church. Convicts abjured their offenses, their crimes, whatever we want to call them, and they were reconciled to the church after they signed a form of abjuration. This was in most cases. Some were absolved, some were relaxed to secular authority to execute a sentence. And these were essentially the purpose of the auto da fe. Now, auto da fe could have been public or private. Now, public auto da fe was a very grand affair. It was meant to impress. It was meant to intimidate. It was meant to keep people in line. It was also meant to show the inquisitors what is the motto of the term: justice and mercy. Justice to people and mercy to those who confessed. The essential aim of the Inquisition was to obtain a confession. Once a confession was obtained, it moved in a different way, along different lines. And the process of incarceration and investigation came very quickly to a close. Now, a lot of the documents relating to Goa's Inquisition are lost or destroyed, but there are still a considerable number left. There are considerable number left, by which we can arrive at a fairly, which gives us a very good picture of what really happened. The first auto was held shortly after the first inquisitors landed in December 1560. I think the first one was about 1562, and the last one, public one, was held in 1774, April 23rd or 24th. Most of these auto da fes were held on a Sunday, and I will later in the show you an example of a few of these so that you get an idea of what they meant. Frederick will put them up on the screen. Uh, Now, there was a pros. The number that are available, uh, the first number that goes up from about 1562 to 1623, there are about 35 autos which have the details of which have been noted or recorded by the Inquisitor Figuera. Now, Figuera was a promoter when he did these things, and he noted a number of these, totally of about 344 names were in his list. Now, I've been able to collect from the Archivo Tombo, Torre de Tomb, and also from another list in which some of these which do not appear in the ANTT uh, have been noted down. And this was done by a gentleman called Moriara somewhere around 1840s or something like that. And putting these together, I've arrived at a figure of about 8,075 names in public autos and a further 1,232, I think, in private autos. So essentially, these together constitute more than half the number from the figure that I arrived at about 20 odd thousand names. Uh, they cover more than half the number of people, and these autos give very they are summary lists. They are
Alan,
not.
Alan,
Yes.
just one interruption. How do the auto fares end up? Just for to get a wide picture, do they necessarily end up in deaths or killings or
No, 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 no.
Okay.
Uh, see, the autodefer list show it very clearly. The names are listed from those. It starts with those that who are absolved or those who either by death or for no for I mean that they were innocent, and then it goes from the least guilty to the ones that comes to the death sentence. So in most of these lists, uh, as I said, out of all these, about 91 death executions were there over these years. So if you take an average, and it's not really an average, uh, because in some cases there were even about 4 or 5 executions. So in many of these lists, there were no executions at all in those years. Now the lists start in a very clear manner. They give the details when it were held, where it was held, the names of the persons, their offenses, starting again from the least guilty to the most guilty, and the punishments, the nature of their crime or the offense, and the penances that were imposed. Which
What could be the nature of the crime and what could be the punishments? Just for example.
I will come to that when you put up one of the later lists. In the subsequent lists, I will just explain those things. But here, if you look at this one, this particular one that you have put up relates to 1608, or it could be 1609, and this name is in the Figueroa's report. Now here, it is a Muslim gentleman called Mahmud, Grande, that means the elder, and he was a merchant, a Muslim, a Mauro Muslim. He was a widower, viuva, and he was living in this city, that means the city of Goa. He was aged, Idade is age of 75, and his was actually not a public auto but a private one, because it is said in the third line it was done at Nesta Meza. Meza is at the table. So, and this date was of the 23rd of October, 1608. Okay, 1608 is there. And his offense was that he took a Christian boy, across the border into Muslim lands, which was then Bijapur, and introduced him to Islam. Uh, so he was punished for that. So these are sort of details that you get as you go along. Now, these earlier ones are not very clear, but could you put up the next one, Frederick?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
Carry on, carry on.
yeah.
I'll just do it.
So while that's being put up, I will just go into how a little bit more on the nature of an auto da. Now, this was a very public demonstration, and it was held at a very prominent pace. Many of them were held in the hall of the Inquisition, which, of course, would have accommodated a certain number of people. I don't know how many. Uh, but a number of them were held in front of uh, on the courtyard in front of the Inquisition table, which was called the Terioro de Sabayo, and this was would have been just in front of the Say Cathedral. Now, there were others that were held in different places. For instance, in the Church of Saint Francis, in the convent of Santa Monica, in they were held in Aldona in the Church of Saint Thomas, uh, and then in Penada Franca. Uh, so a few were held in different places. They were also held at Asolna, Kunkuli, and other places. Now, this is a list of 1651. You see the list of the persons who appeared in the Auto de Fe celebrated on the Terioro de Sabayo in Goa, Domingo Sunday, the 3rd of December, 1651. So as you go down, you find, you see, the persons who were absolved. You see, it is a gentleman called Kwemmaji. He's a Gentio, that means he was not a Christian. His caste was a Gujarat, and he natural and Morodo, that means he was native and living in Trapur. Trapur comes in the northern province, which I would probably be called today Tarapur, where we have our. Then the next comes with the non-Christians, the persons in faith, that means not of the faith. So here you have got Dugu, Gadu, again, all the details are given. And when you see on the right side, he was given 2 years in degradado, that means exiled from the Isle of Goa, Iliash de Goa. So he was exiled from Goa for 2 years for committing certain things. That means he was a Gaunkar of Majorda, he was a Shardo from Salset, and he was living in the city near the church of Santa Lucia. That means it's somewhere near on the connection to Zuen. He was a merchant. Something's happened to this, and he was convicted for Fezer doing sacrificios e gentilidades. My pronunciation again, please. But for sacrifices of Gentile sacrifices in our territories. Now note this: M nosas terras. That means most of these, the Inquisition is not bothered about these offenses committed outside the borders, but it's always, everywhere it is qualified, in our territories, because there were laws there. Whether the laws are justified or unjustified, that question I will not go into. But the Inquisition judged as per the prevailing laws. Many of them were also issued by the Inquisition's edicts. So, for committing these things, they went against the law as it existed then, and for that they were punished. And he did these sacrifices and gentle darts in the company of persons Christians. The next one is Purso Gadao. He was also convicted for the same thing. Now, if I remember right, in the last part of it, where the women's names come, their wives were also convicted of the same thing, but they were sent to the Polwara, that means the gunpowder factories. So the lists go down like this. Uh, from the higher from the least first from the Gentiles or the non-Christians, then it goes to Christians, and they have a particular order uh, as per the punishments that are issued to them. Could we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the auto da fe was where the sentences were passed. Okay, and this is the what was summarized by the notaries or the promoter, actually, not the notaries. It was the notary was only authorized to do this. And now here is another interesting thing. The same year, Luis de Abreu, uh, he was a M. Gentio. That means as a Gentile, his name was Cario Malupoi. So Malpai, he was a Brahmin, and he was from Verna. I don't know whether he was any descendant of Malpai who invited Albuquerque in. Uh, he was he he had been relaxed. He was living earlier in the terra firma, that means across the border in the firm lands, or basically the mainland, and he had been relaxed in M statua. That means his effigy had been burned in an auto celebrated uh, in the hall of the Inquisition uh, in the city in 1645. So that means 6 years earlier. And this was for retroceder de fe catholica. That means he had abandoned the faith and had passed on to the faith of the Gentiles. Now, the last name is, the last word there is appresentado. Now, this is important because, and it has to be mentioned if a person, that means he came voluntarily to the inquisitors and confessed and gave himself up. Now, anybody who did that was that appellation had to be written at the after these details were given. So you find a few of them there. Now, usually appresentados, the first time appresentados were treated very lightly and not given any real penance, but possibly just spiritual instruction and such things. Now, if you look at his sentence, he was in prison, carcere, and habito. That means the costume of infamy. A little down and to the right, if you can. No, no, higher up, higher up. Yes, yes, that's it, that's it. And so perpetua. That means it was to be perpetual. Now, perpetual is a word. It really doesn't mean that it was for eternity. It was for a period of time because enforcement was again another issue, but it was more than just once. And it says sim remissio o come, that's with it was without remission in this case. So when they particularly put that word without remission, that means it was meant to be worn forever. And it was with the insignia de fogo, the fogo, that means the uh, sign of the fire, which was the ones where the fire, the flames are inverted. That means he has been spared. In other words, if he had not come as an appresentado, he would have probably been executed and burnt in the fire. But as he came as that, he got this relaxation and he said, you get one more chance. So it was a sentence of death in carried in abeyance. So the sword of Damocles was always hanging over his head. So these are the nature of things that you get. Uh, could we go to the next one, please?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Just a sec.
Now, while Frederick does that, I'll give you a little bit about how an auto de fa, the ceremony was conducted. Now, this detail comes from Delon's book. Delon is the only person who has recorded how an auto de fa was conducted. Of course, the details how it was to be conducted are given in the regimento, that means the bylaws of the Inquisition. Okay, I'll come to that again, but this one is 1686. This was at Asolna. This was the one in which no one was punished, but all of them had to sign a form, which formally sign a form, which is called M4 and uh, this was held on the 25th of July, 1686. Uh, in the presence of the rector. That is, it was not the inquisitor, but the commissaire, the rector of Rashol, uh, and he was the commissaire, and he was Antonio Ferriera, I think. The company, the Jesu, that means he was a Jesuit from the rector of the College of Rashol, and he conducted this in front of the church at Asolna. So this was a time when they were given a general pardon. Now, this is a very interesting uh, list, because what it gives is what sort of devastation these recent wars had taken place. You all know that in 1684, Sambhaji was poised to take old Goa when a Mughal army came behind them. So this area, being on the borderline, was an area which was subject to very difficult to control, and there were a lot of uh, influences, non-Christian influences, Gentile influences coming from across the border. There was a lot of cross-border travel and communication, and you can see this, and you can see what the effect of these wars were. Could we go down a little, Frederick? Yeah, still lower. I'm just trying to find out if look at this Andre Denis. He was a filio. He was the son of defuncto. You find this word coming very often. Defuncto Antonio Denis. That means his father was dead, so he was an orphan in that way. Not really an orphan because he was of age, and it gives further that he was a renderio, so he was a tax collector, a native of Kukuli, who was living in Asolna in the Palmar, that is the street or road of so and so. In the Mando, he gives the Mando, and he was married to Domingas Diniz. So these names have been recorded. So the inquisitor knows who was involved, which family, where they resided, and what were the relationships. There are, as you see, there are no sentences here because this was given at a time of grace, and all these people came voluntarily. Now, the next one on that list is Andre Castanhar. Uh, you see, this sometimes they're quite difficult to read also, because these documents were written with not a modern pen but a feather, sharpened feather with ink, and you can imagine the promoter sitting down there all alone in the secreto, because nobody else was allowed in there except the inquisitor, uh, spending his time scribbling on a piece of paper and sharpening his pen, and probably getting quite bored, but doing a meticulous job. And he was the son of Lorenzo Castano Kudov. Now, Kudov apparently is a family name in that region, and he was a Shardo Gaunkar uh, from Asolna, the Bairo, that means close to the uh, Vado of the Kudovs. He was married to Ursula. So these are the details you get from these things, and it's a meticulous. I mean, to write down about 12 to 13,000 of these names do take time. So I've reached about 3,000 now. So it's going to take me a bit more time, and I'll make it available to anybody who's interested. Uh, can you take the next slide, Rico? So while Frederick is doing that, I'll tell you something about the auto de fe which is described by Delon. Now, notice was given to others that an auto de fe would be held on such a date, and the people gathered, and a lot of arrangements were made where, as I said, the topmost elite of the land would collect for these fairs. The viceroy was often present. Then you had the ecclesiastical authority, the bishop or archbishop coming, and the inquisitor. They would be the condemned were kept in places of infamy, or and the judges and the people, the elite, were kept opposite them, facing them. So it was quite an intimidating uh, situation for people. No, you've gone back on that.
Okay, I'll get it. I'll
Yeah.
get it.
So now Delon says that he was woken up somewhere around midnight or maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, there were no watches, so it probably a bit of a informed guess. And he was given clothes to wear. These being a lower garment, a pant, and an upper garment, which had black and white stripes, which was a significant. They were symbolic showing that repentance. Over that, he wore the samara. In this case, not the samara. The samara was for the condemned person. It was the San Benito, which had it was a cape, which was with the neck and head protruding through a hole, something like what a priest wears while saying mass. And there was the cross of Saint Andrew at the back and front. He had to carry a large taper, a big stick with a candle on top. It was unlighted until after the abjuration it was lit. So it was meant as a symbol of passing from darkness into light. Fieticheros, that means the sorcerers were given the carocha or the dunce cap with the words carocha di fietichero. That means the dunce cap of a sorcerer. Some others were also given that, which like dogmatic people who refuse to listen, revert from their stand. So they were all barefoot and bareheaded, except for the ones wearing the karocha. Uh, and the they were handed over to persons who were called the familiars. Now, a familiar was usually a fidalgo, a Portuguese, usually, and of eminent position. For instance, Delon's familiar was in charge of the navy. It's something one of the maybe the topmost official in the navy. So, and he accompanied him right through until the auto de fe was complete, and he was handed back into the hands of the jailers or into the hands of the secular authority in the case of those who were to be executed. So, in his particular case, there were two persons in this category. One was a man and one was a woman. And uh, the woman was condemned for sorcery, for relapse into sorcery. So, evidently, it was not the first time she had been convicted. His auto de fe list is not available, but some details are available. These particular details are available in Bayon's book. You know. So, uh, around the beginning of daylight, the great bell of the Say Cathedral would start ringing, and the procession would start with the banner of the Inquisition leading the procession, and they would go around the main roads. This walk would take about an hour, with the least guilty in front and the uh, behind them, and the those who were to be handed over for execution at the rear. Along with those at the rear would be, in case someone had died and his bones were to be burnt, there would be a box carrying those bones. There would also be those who were condemned in effigy. That means the effigies were to be burnt. So these effigies would be carried. Uh, and between these two categories was the cross, a crucifix, a large crucifix, with Christ facing to the front. So the ones that were condemned could only see the back of the cross, and that was a clear sign to them that they had been uh, renounced. This procession probably Abreu gives in his book. Abreu's book is the first translation of, first sort of thing to come out in Portuguese, and he lists this route as coming out, and it would have come out onto the Rua de Reta and passed down via the Palace of the Viceroys, which comes near the where the galleys were, or
Alan,
entrance.
Alan, just to interrupt, sorry, just to interrupt. At some point, I feel that the details are a bit overpowering,
Okay.
because you have obviously studied it so closely and you know it so well. It's almost as if you're
Mm.
walking through those streets. And my concern is that because we've been fed with so many horror stories of those times, we might actually be subconsciously trying to fit in what we are hearing with what we know, what we think
Mm.
we know. Okay, so I just want to raise one issue here, to flag one issue. I was searching for death by fire in the 16th century on in the internet, and there's a lot of material on that. And apparently the point they are making is that death by fire was the normal, was one of the ways of execution, apart from hanging also in those times. So it is could my question is, a, could it be seen as a death penalty, what we have today, maybe by execution, or maybe by gallows, or even by injections in the US and things like that? Was it the norm then? Because even people like Saint Joan of Arc have been burnt at the stake for a series of very complex, French British kind of conflicts. Although she was a Catholic herself, and the king ruling France were also was the same, and things like that. But so I want to say, I want to ask, was it the norm of death sentences then?
I cannot say, except the only thing I can say is going by the list, because that's the only thing that I've really studied. I've not studied other things, so I can't talk about that. Yes, but uh, for instance, but just one that I do know is what was done in 1787 after what was called the uh, conspiracy of the Pinto Conspiracy, and those were not condemned by fire, but what they did was these people were dragged behind the tail of a horse, and then their hands were cut off, and then their limbs, and they were hung, and that sort of thing. So
Quartering, or what they call quartering,
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind.
In England, it would be hung, drawn, and quartered.
But
And
that was by the civil state, right?
yeah, yeah,
For the
civil
people
state.
to be.
The execution never, I mean, the Inquisition never carried out any sentences because it was a purely judicial
Judicial
body. It was a pure
judicial
ecclesiastical
body.
body. Any sentences that were to be executed, they were handed over to secular authority. Whether they were sent to the gunpowder factories, or whether they were sent to the galleys, or whether they were uh, for any other things, these went to these were handed over to secular justice, that civil authority, and they carried out the sentence. Okay.
Right. Carry on. Carry on.
Yeah. So, maybe after an hour or so, they came to the place where the auto was to be held. There was a sermon. Then the abjurations took place one by one, and then the sentences were passed, and the people were handed over to secular authority, those who had to be. After that, it didn't end there. After that, they were sent to carry out the sentences in the following days, and uh, then whatever happened. So this was how it was done. Now, the executions were carried out in a place called the Campo Sao Lazaro, which for today, if you go via the ruins of St. Paul's, that's when you go on the road to Ponda, uh, those ruins are still there. And it's past that there was a hospital of St. Lazarus. It's not there anymore. And then there was a huge ground there. It was called the Campo Sao Lazaro, in a big lake. So this is where uh, most of these things were carried out. But I think the detail that I have is of Father Constantino's execution. That was, they say, on the banks of the Mandovi. Maybe it's the same place because it may be a part of the Mandovi river. This particular could have been a little backwater. Now, coming to this particular one, could you go down, Rico?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is also the same as Solna one. You can get more details. I just wanted to see.
Yeah. This one.
Yeah, come to the end. If any name was given, yeah. No,
Simao. Simao
nothing is
Ranga.
there. Okay. So this is just one of those things. Maybe we can go to the next slide.
Yeah. 1730.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll go to that.
Just a sec.
You see now how these uh, handwritings change, how the nomenclature changes, and some names change, the terminologies also change. So it takes a lot of. Now this is Joseph. A little. Is it possible? Okay, we'll go to the second one on that list, and if it can be a little bit
Yeah.
larger, Bento de Souza. Uh, he was a Portuguese. Oh, Cara Josa, that's his name. Portuguese, and so he comes from Braga. So it gives all these details. And then what he did. So he gave his palavras, that means words, which were obviously something to do with heresy and blasphemy. Uh,
Do you have any idea of what was the range of issues which people were being tried for?
yes, you see, heresy was one of the laws. Then gentilidad, that means Gentile practices, which came in very many different forms. Then Islamism, there's Mauro, again in many different forms. Uh, Relapses were there. Then blasphemy is just the odd case that we get. Bigamy was there. Then sodomy. Then in the case of priest solicitation, and what you call revealing confessional secrets. I think it's called sigilism. Which comes only towards the latter part in the latter ones. Anything further down on this?
One second.
I think. So here you get, okay. Just a minute. Just a minute. Just come
Yeah.
go up a bit. Yeah, yeah, that's the one I want. So this Lorenzo Barreto was a Sudro, uh, and he was from Dharmapur in Salset. Now this Salset is not a Goan Salset, but in the north, the
No,
island of Salset.
probably here, Alan, because you have a Dharmapur here. What they
Aha,
call
okay,
Dharmapur today.
okay,
Dharmapur.
fair enough. That's good.
Dharmapur.
I'd like to be corrected there. Now he was reconciled in the auto, which was held at the Say Cathedral on in 1728 for Gentilidad. Now this is the second time. Okay, this is the second time he has been found as a diminuto for the same crime. That means he had not confessed fully. So subsequently, the Inquisition has found out. How they found out, we don't know. Probably he was denounced, that he didn't confess fully, so he was brought back, and for the same thing he was punished. Now what was his punishment? If you go to the right, Frederick.
Yeah, one second. Just a sec. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So here it's again prison and habit. The habit is the costume of infamy, perpetua. That means perpetually, which again is for a period of years. And it specifically mentions that he was absolved of excommunication, because the moment someone was brought into prison, he was excommunicated. That was part of the things. And in prison, he was not given his the if he was a priest, he was not given any Bible or any reading material except for what was related to his case. So now the interesting thing is, here in some of these cases we find that as per the papal brief, which was given at the request of the king, Indian Christians, not Portuguese Christians or New Christians or priests, Indian Christians were given up to, they were not punished, they were punished lightly for the first offense. If they committed the offense, for the second offense, it was a little more serious. But on the third offense only, they were given more severe punishment. So there are quite a few cases of these things given, and the directives were given from Portugal, from Lisbon, to treat, in the words of the people there, Indian Christians mildly, so that they would not run away, because the purpose was to retain them, not frighten them and send them away. But if they stepped beyond a certain thing, there had to be certain examples to be kept.
What were the lessons, Alan, that you learned which are different from what we seem to know from the past through the Auto the Fairs in particular, since we are talking about this topic today?
You see, so far, what you get is just in the earlier narratives, you get just one or two sort of images of the Inquisition that comes through, that they were very severe and they punished people, and there were quite a few, the fires were always lit and such things. You know, when you read this Buchanan's book, The Lately Lit in Goa, like what he writes. But when you read this list, you find that many of them were given just spiritual sentences, and it followed the process of a judicial system, of a very strong judicial system, where the records were kept, and the inquisitors could access previous records. They were kept under the names, they were kept places, they were kept in the files relating to the particular crime that was committed. So they could refer to these and then decide on the judgment that had to be given. They opened out lines of inquiry. So there was a very strong judicial element, which possibly I can't say for sure, as I said, because I have not studied them at all, but was not present in the civil courts. So, and you find quite a few of these manner of which trials were conducted in present courts, you know, in different countries. So it's a pre-modern system that has been adopted by the inquisitors. So one, you find that. Two, you find in certain cases uh, where you'd expect, like for instance, selling your Christian daughter, or your daughter. Let's forget she's a Christian, but just selling your daughter. Maybe you are starving. Maybe all this is there, but selling them to uh, someone across the border, you're never going to see that child again. Now, this is a, I don't know how to look at that, because, and here you find that you would expect some very harsh treatment to be given, but that was not the case. So whether the inquisitors looked at it in a little kindly light, or whether there were some other things at hand, I don't know. But these are things which are left open for future uh, people to study and to enlighten us. So in my case, I'm going to just sort of list these out and leave it to people who want to study them further to refer to the documents and see and come up with the better explanation that I can offer.
So you're working on an exhaustive list of all these cases. How many in all?
As I said earlier, I've got about uh, over 9,000 names, about 9,500 names or so, which I will list out. And then I will see if I can. The earlier list is available, what was done by Figuera, and this is accessible to anybody who's interested. If they just go online and access what is called the Repertorio de Figuera, and this has been compiled by this Brazilian scholar, Bruno Feitler, from the University of Sao Paulo. And this is freely available, and you can, and it's in a very beautiful format. He has used software because he has been funded. I'm not funded by anybody, so I have to do it with an Excel sheet. But I'm following his method and trying to align it as closely as possible to that, so people
Ag-
can access the same information.
Against the names, we will get links to the particular records which we could track
Yes,
down because
yes,
they're
yes,
online. Because
yes,
they're
yes,
online.
yes, yes. I will give those links.
It's amazing. It's
I
amazing.
will
The
give
kind
those
of
links. You can access the Torah de Tom, or you'll have to. In some cases, it will be available in Moriara's book, which can be downloaded from the Lisbon library.
I see. I see. So technology has actually changed our understanding of the past, and
Totally, totally. Because I'm sitting at my desk and doing all this, is as if I don't have to spend money to go to Lisbon and spend hours there. It will be nice to do it if somebody funds me, but
this is the second best
yeah,
and also very effective. No.
yeah, yeah. Because you get much more time sitting at here. You can
Yes.
start whenever you want. You can work during the day or night.
How many hours did it take you to do all this?
I've lost count, really. I've lost count. But
Days, months,
years, really.
years.
Because the thing is, when you start reading them initially, you just can't understand. This was all, Shakespeare would say Greek and Latin, but actually it is all Portuguese, handwritten, and it's just impossible to understand what are the short forms, how the particular inquisitor uses these words or not. Then you read them, reread them, try to understand. You use Google Translate, you use some references where the same text is available in Portuguese and English. Then you start getting an understanding. For instance, a simple case, each on the left side, it is called penas, Penas. Now, it took me quite a lot of time to understand what this meant. If you Google it, you get the word translation as feathers. Now, what has feathers got to do with this? But then ultimately it just means penance. But that word apparently is not there in Google, and it's not there in modern things. I don't know how Google translates it, but Google has improved quite a lot, the translation.
I remember that one case where you were searching for this Vado in Asolna, and we were trying to locate
The
what it
kudos,
actually meant, kudos.
yeah,
And there were people on the on one of the WhatsApp Asolna groups that actually gave us a direct pointer to their names and who
yeah,
was there and who they were referring to and things like that.
yeah. So this gives some very interesting things, because once I give you these details and make it public, you can find some of your own villages are there. Like, for
Hmm.
instance, I was just doing this list of 1686, and it's very interesting because this Solna is 1680. It's around the 1688 I'm talking of. So Solna was 1686. It's just after the Maratha Sambhaji's wars. The next one was at Kukuli in 1694, where again a similar uh, period of grace was extended, just like in Asolna. Now, in this one of 1688, uh, surprisingly, there are large number. Large number would be because the cases relating to Mauro or Islamism normally comes in, 2 or 3 or 4, or even one, or nothing at all. But in this case, from Margao, in the area of Murde,
Murda Opiken,
Opike, and Murda o
Murda O
Grand.
Grand. I know there are still areas in
They're
Goa.
still there. So from
Yeah.
there, you find that at least about 8 to 10 uh, people have been convicted for becoming Muslims. Now, how did Islam come in there? Because this was a war with the Marathas. So whether because what I can think of is that the Sambhaji withdrew because the Mughal army came. So did these people join the Mughal army or cross the border and do something and got involved and converted there and then came back? It's very interesting, and if it's not in any historical record, it would be interesting to explore a little bit further and find out. So these lists give pointers to look for historical developments.
So you are connecting, Alan. You are connecting all these kind of religious stands with the political developments of those days.
Yeah,
You
that
think there is a
definitely,
direct
it has to
relationship?
be related, and that is one of the things these lists have been pointed out. Otherwise, why should the a period of grace be given in a solna, where an open letter saying, "Okay, come forward, and whoever comes forward signs this form of abjuration, and let's start from a clean slate." And then you find so many people orphaned in a solna, especially. It must have been a
Because of
terrible.
the war. Because of the war.
It must have been. What else could it be? It's the fathers who have died.
I see.
In Kukuli, it's a little bit different. You don't find so many uh, people who have lost their fathers, but that is a bit later, about 1694. But then again, it's across the border. The border is just close by.
So you're suggesting that this is a worthy topic for further study also.
Definitely, definitely. You find the same issues happening in Aldona when the Bosle, during the Bosle time in 1710, 1712. 1709, there were a lot of deaths there. That we will discuss when you come in the next chapter on Bardes and Aldona. You say I'll try to bring out similar lists like this, and this particular one, we'll put it up, how many died in prison and how many were. Uh,
So all these are border villages virtually in that sense, no?
yes, yes. So that gives you an indication that the inquisitors were working to consolidate the ranks of loyal subjects whom they saw as Christians for in this way. Of course, you find in the north also some similar patterns are there. So it's a very interesting. This study will go on for quite a long time, and the number of doctorates can be got by young people who are interested in this.
But it seems to be a bit of a shocker, because whatever you're saying runs 50, 80, 90% contrary to what we believe so far. And it's not just us, like people on the periphery who may not be very devout in our belief and things like that, who have got convinced by this. But I was shocked and surprised to even notice that very devout Catholics have actually bought into this argument about what the Inquisition was, what it represented, how harsh it was, and all these kind of things, because it has been repeated so many times by different sources that it seems to be the truth in that sense. Any comments?
Yeah, you just we'll be talking about the palace of the Inquisition, the Sabayo Palace, sometime later in one of the talks that follows. And there, you see, the very fact that the lower rooms have been rented out as shops to non-Christians, it reveals one heck of a lot. And that one of these shops was a butcher shop, and instructions had to come from Lisbon to have the shop removed from there. Now,
So
this is in the
in
high.
our Facebook discussion, someone commented that it couldn't have been a gentio, in the sense that it couldn't have been the butcher shop couldn't have been a Hindu in that sense, no?
No, 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 no. There are quite a few Nayaks who are, and even Brahmins, they're called Nayaks, whose designation comes as, I think it is Botiquero or something like that, which is the term for butcher. So perhaps they didn't butcher it directly, but maybe they
Okay,
employed, uh, because in any case, where there's business, why not? Or what it is, I don't know. But it's up to somebody else to try to understand this particular phenomena.
interesting.
You see, when somebody says that it couldn't have been a butcher because, I mean, a gentio because, they don't
Yeah,
go into butchering. Uh, this is a modern concept. What was the concept 300 years back? Was it the same?
yeah, yeah.
These are issues that are being raised by this.
You've also made a point that the largest numbers of autos da fe were held in the Sabayo Palace, or the sea cathedral, but others were held in churches of Saint Augustine, I guess the Saint Augustine's Tower, Saint Francis, the convent of Santa Monica in Old Goa,
Yes.
and Aldona, Peña de France, which are villages in Goa, Jua or Kumbarjua, Asolna, Kunkoli, and other places, right?
That is correct. Uh, it, it could have been a sort of a tour de force, where
Okay,
the presence was to be done. And you find
right.
this pattern, certain the s- s- you can see clearly that the inquisitors were moving around over places, and they were selecting. They would go when you start comparing from the in the inventory of 1774. You find very interesting some documents also there in which lists the where these denunciations and where these other things were done, and it surely shows where the inquisitor went to investigate. So usually you find after that investigation he makes all these things. Then about a year later you find or maybe a little beyond that, you find a lot of names from those particular villages where he went. So it was not just that people came up to old Goa and knocked at the door and said, "Hey, I want to denounce this person," or so. The inquisitor went to different villages, which was part of how it was in Europe, medieval Europe, what you read, and announced his intention and called forth for people to come forward, delivered a sermon, called forth for people to come forward. Say, if you have anything on your mind, or if you have done anything, or if you know of anybody who has done these things, come forward and denounce them, because this is necessary for the salvation of your soul. You see, this brings out another point which you notice. The in those times, and this comes very clearly, there was a clear distinction between saving a body and saving a soul. The soul and body were together,
Distinct or together?
in one body, in one being, but distinct. So, saving a body was not that important as saving the soul. So even at the time of when a condemned person was being led to the stake, all along he was accompanied by two priests, mainly Jesuits, I think, who kept on
Badgering?
badgering or sort of trying to convince him to convert and to give up and say, I mean, you're going to be burnt. There's no way out because the case has been passed. But
Okay.
save your soul, save your soul, save your soul. See, so it's the medieval mind. It's a different mind from what we have today, because we don't believe. I mean, most of us. Uh,
We
have,
might think that capital punishment also is outlandish and deserves to be done away with at our point of time.
yes, today, I mean, a lot of countries have done away with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it continues in our part of the world.
yeah.
And then, Alan, you also made this point, as you were explaining just recently, that the list of the convicted persons was routinely sent to Lisbon. We've seen copies of them. The handwritten sheets followed a prescribed format. The heading gives the details of the date and the place. Each entry gives details such as the names of the offender, sometimes aliases or pre-conversion name. We've seen that also. Sometimes the father may be, the son may be Christian, but the father may not. The age, the caste. Caste was another form of identity in those times. Profession, nationality, relation to others, nature of the offense, place of birth, current place of residence. That's a lot. And punishments are listed in the right corner. Men are listed first, and persons under various categories according to the severity of their offense, as you've just shown us, right?
And women come. So there was a men first and women later. The women always last. So that's the way it was looked at.
Maybe also their culpability was seen as less, no, because men were
You
seen as
Yeah, you find that less. The number of women are far less than the number of men. Uh, and usually, you see, women were never sent to the galleys. At best, they were sent to the polvara, and for less number of years and such things. Some did end up being executed, but a few were there.
there is this full image of them being sexually abused, and that is being written about, I think, by Buchanan or
No,
much of his interesting literature.
there is one which was uh, supposed to have been said by the Archbishop of Evora in one of his sermons, and that was quoted again. It appears at the time of the liberation time, when Kuna, what was his name? The famous
Uh, uh,
freedom.
Priolkar,
No, the freedom fighter, Kuna, no?
Kunya Rivara,
Kuna Rivera.
or
Not
TB
Kuna
Kunya,
Rivera,
sorry, TB Kunya, TB Kunya.
TB Kunya.
Yeah,
So, and I've got a chapter on that, where I ask, and I've given the names of about, there are only about 17 women who were executed out of this
yeah.
entire list. And most of them were widows or, of the people who were subjected to, lived a very harsh life and just from hand to mouth existence. So, and
Yeah.
women aged prematurely in those days. So I don't know what could attract an inquisitor's fancy there. There is
Uh,
another thing. If you just go back to those lists, the last
yeah.
ones, you'll find that what I was telling you about copies being sent in the archives, there are it's listed as 5 copies, but I've been able to get only 4 of the 1745 list, and 4 of them are available. They all signed by the same promoter. Uh, I think his name is Gilom the something or the other. And
Just a sec, I'm there.
they have been signed on 7th January 1747. You see here. Now this is copy number 1. Okay, and this is preserved in the Consular General, that means in the office of the Inquisition of the Santo Officio, and it's in It's Maso. That's a pack 31, number 7, and this is the first copy, 1745. The next one,
Yeah. Just next picture.
yeah, next one, next picture,
1745.
number 2.
Yeah, two.
It's in the,
You need a sip of water.
yeah, I will have one phone.
Well, I just get it up.
You see,
The
this is
way some of these records were retained was amazing. No,
yeah,
I don't think
this is
people have
number
done such a
2,
job.
2 or 3. What is that number there?
Two, two, two.
2. So
1745,
this is the
two.
second copy. So it's all in this. It looks same because it is written by the same person on the same day.
Okay.
So then you go to the last of that.
Yeah.
You see, the age also is recorded.
Okay, one second. 1745, 6, 6.
Yeah.
Just a sec. Almost there.
Now, yeah. If you go down, no, right to the bottom,
Yeah,
right to the bottom.
yeah,
You see this? That's the seal of the archives. But
yeah,
if you go down here, now you see this was written in the Secreto in Goa,
yeah,
Secreto de Santo Officio, 6th January 1747, by
yeah,
the promoter Father
yeah.
Gilomo di Rosario. So he was the prosecuting lawyer, and it was his job to compile these lists and send them. So in
I
this
see.
particular case, he has sent four copies. No, 5 copies because it mentions 5, but I was able to get only 4. Uh, and in this particular case, 4 of them have been preserved over there.
I see.
So,
Interesting.
there is hope. Now, let's look at one thing. In 1774, after all these whatever documents were compiled and sent to
Yeah,
Lisbon,
yeah,
uh, when it was reopened in 1778, only some of these documents were brought back because the cost of transportation was very high. So some
yeah.
came back. So I still have a hope that some boxes may still be left there. And if somebody searches diligently and spends a lot of time, he may find this out. Can you
I-
just go a little bit up because the last case seems to be one who was relaxed. So maybe people may like to know. Okay, this one. Okay, now this is a person who's relaxed em statua. That means his effigy was burned, either because she- no, this is a lady, a woman,
Maybe.
Joana de Atied, Sudra, widow, Viva de Domingos Nunez. This is something which is interesting. The surnames are not the same.
No, but that's a Goan tradition, no, Alan, because even till today,
Uh,
many Goan women don't change their name after marriage.
so you had this
Yeah, so Ataid may be married to Nunes. So that
Eunice,
is,
okay,
yeah,
and
yeah. They
she was
retain
a
their name.
yeah, she was a native of the parish
Nirbandhan.
of Ribandar, uh, and uh, but living Morodo in Sao Lorenzo in the
Yeah,
city of
yeah,
Goa, and she was burnt. Maybe she had died, or what is not given here, but you'll find that every one of those people who were condemned to death or the bones to be burned, you
yeah.
find these sort of names coming in, these sort of words: convicta, confessor,
I see.
revogante, impenitente, and so many
I
other
see.
things like simulado. And
So she was burnt by effigy. She was burnt by effigy.
yeah, her effigy was burned. Uh, Maybe because she was absent, or uh,
She had
maybe
died.
she had already died because she was a widow. May have died even in the, but she must have. But uh, the inquisitors seem to want to justify and emphasize that they're not condemning a person just arbitrarily, but
Due process. Due
they
process.
cannot because they cannot be brought back into the
Okay.
cannot be reconciled. and it seems to be kind of they're not comfortable with sending people to the death. But so when they use these words, that's the message I get across. Maybe somebody else will get a different message.
I see. That it's that they've tried their best and they couldn't do it. That's what they're saying.
Yes, yes. And these words are there. I've produced. I've given all the names that are there in one of the chapters of the book.
I see. In one of your in your book also you make this point that the auto da fes, there were at least 176 public auto da fes conducted by the
Mm.
Goa Inquisition.
Mm.
Of these, 93 complete list are available from 1640 to 1773.
It
They
may.
give the names
It's
of
around
about 8,
90.
yeah, around 90. They give the names of about 8,000 people persecuted, and
Prosecuted.
yeah, prosecuted, sorry, prosecuted. These include the names of 91 persons who were physically burnt, uh, at 113 burnt in effigy. Additionally, the names of 1,232 persons who were sentenced in private auto da fes are known. And the last auto da fe took place in 1774. Now, this is close to the time of the Pombal, no?
Yeah,
Marquis
yeah.
Pombal.
Just before the Inquisition was abolished, the first time. After
Okay.
that, all inquisitions, all out of the affairs were held in private, inside the hall of the. There was no public.
It's a bit complex to understand the role of Pombal in with religion, with the church, with the nobility and things like that. No, I mean that's another crucial piece of the jigsaw. I don't think we understand enough of that.
Yeah, but again, that's a different issue. So I
Yeah,
know very little of it.
yeah. There's a question here
Yeah.
from James. Does the book mention subjectively about a number of Christians killed by Tipu Sultan?
No,
Think
no. This is
I
nothing to
think
do.
that's a different issue
It's
altogether.
nothing to do with the Inquisition at all. And
And and
I
and
think
actually
I think
Alan
this.
actually Alan has written on that. He has written extensively on that. He's written a full book called The Slaves of the Sultans. And for the record, Alan's views are not to claim victim status for Christians there, but to rather see it again in the political terms. You'd like to state it briefly, Alan, because people might like to know what are
Yeah,
your.
I think this question is not worded correctly, because when you talk about number of Christians killed by Tipu Sultan, he didn't intentionally kill as such, and then which Christians are you referring to? Are you referring to Christians from which part of the country, or whether they were enemy soldiers,
I
European
think
soldiers?
Mangaloreans. I think the issue here is about the Mangaloreans taken in captivity. So, would you like to say a little of your study
Well,
there?
I would rather say use it how many died because of the captivity. That would be because people did die. That, as you said, that's mentioned in uh, Slaves of Sultans. I've given the figures what I have been able to collect over there. I'm not sure whether we should talk about it here, because
It's
this.
interesting because just as a passing point, I think you don't hold too much rancor against Tipu for what he did to your ancestors, do you?
There are two sides. There are two sides to this, Frederick. And as a when you write history, you have to keep your emotions out of the picture. Otherwise, you come out with some wrong histories. Emotions have no place in history. You take facts and evidence and then write up the story. Or you can come formulate hypotheses as well if the facts are not sufficient, or the evidence is not sufficient to come up.
So, what are your facts on Tipu? What are your facts on Tipu?
But the emotions and the trauma of this is there, and that comes out in the novel which I've written, uh, Shades Within Shadows. So I think I've done justice from both sides to this. And
In summary
summary of.
of the of shades and slaves.
No, these two books, you see, Shades was written first, and there I have allowed myself a little freedom, which a novelist is allowed. So when somebody reads that, and there are few instances which I've quoted of the Inquisition there, of instances, but uh, that is more out of imagination and for uh, writing a good, I mean, a story which people may like to read and have a little laugh at, rather than facts. The facts come out now in this book and in the subsequent things that I have. So basically, it is Shades is written around the time of the captivity. I link up the agricultural lives because there's a very exhaustive 3-volume book written by not Claudius Buchanan, but Francis Buchanan, who toured South Canara, Malabar, and everywhere, and wrote some very detailed, minute observations of the entire life and revenues there. So we have a very good idea of what the agricultural season was right through. So I use these 9 months of captivity to describe the entire agricultural cycle and link it up with also the festivals of the church, and link up people's lives and other things. Plus, link up the uh, some of the stories that I heard in my childhood, because there was one about a poltergeist which haunted the house of one gentleman called Ambu Kastali. So I brought that in and a few other things like that. But it ends up with this uh, captivity, the march, and the pathos and the tragedy of the entire thing. People dying like flies and such things, because within the first year, what Wilkes records is about practically one third of the population had died. So if you had about 33,000 captives, about 10,000 had died out of disease and illness and other things. So
Which is huge, no? Which is huge.
yeah,
I mean,
massive, massive.
this is like a Holocaust at a small level.
Yeah,
But of course, that's in your novel. Now, in your history book, what are your conclusions that you come out with there?
in the history book, I start with how we really became. I mean, I will devote a chapter to what happened in Goa during the conversion time, why the migrations took place, the settlements in Canara, because essentially it is about the Mangalorean Christians, and then I link up the other background developments, how what the English were doing in Bengal and coming down, what the intentions were. Then Hyder Ali rise to power. There were two Goan priests who were intimately involved, very close to Hyder Ali. One was your namesake Narona, and the other gentleman was Father Miranda, Joachim Miranda, who comes from Talauli, and he spent about 27 years and in Canada. And uh, Hyder Ali was quite fond of him and gave him some privileges, and he built a monastery there for training seminaries. Uh,
Amazing, no, amazing the way history plays itself out, and not the way we try to imagine it as one religion fighting the other, and that's all.
No,
That's all.
it's not, because you see, even Tipu, people describe him as a bigot, and it doesn't. See, I don't think any ruler really is a bigot or influences that, because he knows bigotry will destroy his kingdom. It drives people away. A ruler and then wants people to stay. He wants industry, and this is what Hyder brought. This is what Tipu brought. You see, and he visualized a scheme for Christians in his field as such, where they would be de-linked or cut away from the Portuguese influence, which was and Christianity, and brought into uh, building up his economy as such. So when you see these things, you see his mind working differently. Of course, we are the victims, and, and our mind works differently as well, and we don't like it. And that pathos and this thing is there. But we have to understand the situation. That is
Very
different. That is
interesting.
writing history.
Just for those who have come in late and don't know about Alan's work, this is going to be his fourth book. His first one was
Fifth
called
book.
Saraswati's Children. Fifth, I've
Fifth
lost
is
count.
the fifth is still under with Orient Black
Okay,
Swan under
okay, okay,
publication.
okay, okay. So this is going to be his fifth book, but it's jumping the queue and it's going to come out fourth. That's
Yeah,
correct.
okay. Fine.
And the first book is called Saraswati's Children, which looks at the history of the Mangalorean Christians, which over the years Alan has slightly changed his views on. So he's going to come out with an updated ebook version of that. It's out of print, and he would give a one final chapter explaining exactly why he views the issue differently somewhat now. The second book is called Slaves. Sorry,
Shades, shades.
Shades Within Shadows. Shades Within Shadows. That's a novel. It's not a history book, and it very lyrically tells you the story of the Mangalorean Christians. The third book is called Slaves of the Sultans, which is Tipu Sultan story of captivity of the Mangalorean Christians. A very tragic story, but as Alan says, you have to see everything in context. And Alan goes against the views of some of the earlier writers. I would think maybe Praxi Fernandez or others who have seen it differently, and he gives his own take on the issue. And now, of course, the fourth book is on the peopling of India and particularly Goa. It's awaiting publication with Orient Longman. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the last book, which is coming out fourth, is the one on the Goa Inquisition, much awaited here. Alan, thanks for all the time you've been putting in, and the grilling I've been, kind of. I mean, I'm not a hard interviewer in that sense. I won't interrupt you and shout at you and things like that. But like taking 1 hour over a brief interview, 1 hour 15 minutes, is not a joke. I mean, like it's showing on your throat, and I've been just sitting back and watching. Thank you for all the work. Looking forward to your book. We'll keep you informed. We are doing a few more in this series, so our talks are not yet over. Feel free to join us. Because of the sudden nature, we may not announce it, but the recordings are all there, and we'll anyone interested, just ask us. We'll point them to you. It's on my basically on my YouTube channel, so just search for my name, you'll find it. Any last words, Alan?
No, thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk and letting people. It's a good way to communicate information rather than written information, and there's some far better way. Uh, and the main thing is to correct the perceptions of this very contentious and controversial subject, which has created so much of ill will. I hope this information I give helps an understanding and a better relationship between. It hurts when I see some of the things that are happening today based on so much of misinformation, and so now at least people will be able to know where to access information and sincerely look at these things, and maybe things may become a better way for everyone.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
we'll end up here for now, but we'll be back soon in 3-4 days time.
And
Bye.
thank you to the listeners who